They never found his body. The sheriff organized a search through the orchard, the fields, and the woods beyond, but the land gave up nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of clothing, not even the disturbed earth of a shallow grave. It was as if he had simply stepped out of the world and into another place entirely, a place where only she could follow. The townsfolk argued about what had happened. Some swore he had taken his own life in the river, letting the current carry him far from the town's memory. Others believed he'd locked himself away somewhere in the house, in a room no one had ever found, still talking to her in the dark. But there was one story, told only in whispers, that unsettled even the most skeptical. It claimed that on the night he vanished, a lantern was seen moving through the orchard, slow and deliberate, with two figures walking side by side beneath the moonlight. One tall, one small, both holding hands. The house on the hill was left to rot. The orchard collapsed into thickets, the roof caved in, and the windows became black hollows in the face of the old building. But still, people avoided it. Children dared each other to climb the front steps, only to turn back before reaching the door. Even decades later, newcomers to the town would stop and stare at the ruins, sensing, without knowing why, that something had been sealed there, something not meant to be disturbed. Years passed, and the story became a kind of curse. Young lovers would joke about calling each other darling in the way she had, only to fall silent when an older voice warned them not to. Because in this town, the word had a weight it carried nowhere else. It wasn't romance, it was possession. Her grave still stands in the cemetery, though the stone is cracked and weather-worn. His name is not beside hers, yet people leave flowers there in pairs, and if you stand by her headstone, at dusk, when the sun dips low and the light turns cold, some say you can hear a man's voice, low, steady, unbroken, whispering the same word he had spoken until the very end. Darling. After her burial, the brother became a ghost in his own right. Weeks passed without him appearing in town. Those who braved the road to the hill said they saw movement in the upstairs window, just a flicker, as if someone were pacing. Others claimed they heard the sound of two voices through the cold night air, one deep and one soft, as though she still answered him. Spring came, and with it the sheriff paid another visit, hoping to find the man ready to rejoin the living. But when the door opened, the brother looked thinner, paler, his eyes sunk deep into his skull. The house smelled faintly of smoke and candle wax. He led the sheriff upstairs without a word, and there, in the same room where she had died, was a chair pulled close to her empty bed. On the pillow, perfectly aligned, lay the same silver locket from her grave. It was clean, polished, and warm to the touch, as though it had never been buried at all. When the sheriff asked about it, the brother simply said, "She wanted it back." The way he said it left no room for argument, as if returning it to her had been a matter of life or death. The sheriff left that day with more questions than answers, and with the quiet conviction that the man was living in a world where time had stopped, the moment she drew her last breath. By summer, the orchard behind the house had gone wild, branches heavy with fruit that no one picked. The paths through the garden grew over, the gates rusted shut. But at night, the candlelight still appeared in that same upstairs window, flickering long after midnight, and though no one admitted it aloud, some of the older folks swore that the flame moved, not like a light in the wind, but like someone carrying it slowly across the room. When autumn came, the brother himself vanished. No note, no sign of struggle, just an unlocked door and a house gone silent. The bed where she had died was empty, but the pillow bore the faint impression of two heads side by side, and on the nightstand, a single scrap of paper, 4 words, written in a hand that was not entirely his. "Good night, my darling." On the third day, the sheriff went up to the house with 2 deputies, claiming it was a matter of public health. They knocked for nearly 10 minutes before the door opened. The brother stood there, gaunt, his shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot but steady. He didn't ask why they had come. He only stepped aside and let them in. The house was colder than the winter air outside. Every surface was layered in dust except for a single path worn into the floorboards leading to the staircase. The deputies followed it, each step groaning under their boots. At the top of the stairs they found the bedroom. She was still there, still dressed in the nightgown she'd died in, her hair neatly combed, her hands folded over her chest. The room smelled faintly of lavender, but beneath it was something else, sweet, cloying, unmistakable. The sheriff asked him why he hadn't called for her to be taken away. The brother's voice was calm when he answered. "She didn't want to be alone," he said, "and I won't leave her." His gaze never wavered from her face, as if speaking to anyone else was an interruption. One of the deputies, younger than the rest, later told his wife that he'd felt something in that room, something pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He said it wasn't grief, it was possession. The way the brother spoke, it was as if she belonged to him in death, just as she had in life. The sheriff finally insisted she be taken to the undertaker. The brother didn't protest, but he followed every step of the way, walking beside the men who carried her, refusing to let her body out of his sight. At the funeral, he stood so close to the coffin that the preacher had to angle himself just to speak the words over her. When the earth covered her casket, he didn't cry. He simply placed a small silver locket on top of the mound. No one dared to ask what was inside. That night, the candle in the upstairs window burned again, and though she was buried miles away, some swore they saw a figure sitting in that room, still holding her hand. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? When the town doctor was finally called to the house, it was already too late. She was lying in the upstairs bedroom, pale as linen, her breath shallow and ragged. He said her eyes were fixed on the corner of the room, as if she saw something no one else could see. Her brother sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering the same word over and over, "Darling." The doctor would later confess he had never heard a man say that word with such a mixture of reverence and desperation. Her illness had come on slowly, the way rot spreads in old wood. She had been coughing for months, refusing to seek help, insisting that her brother could care for her. And he did. Day and night, never leaving her side, feeding her spoonfuls of broth, keeping her hair brushed, wiping her brow. It was a kind of devotion that would have been beautiful if not for the feeling that it came from a place far darker than love alone. The doctor noticed something strange about the room. There were no photographs, no mirrors, no signs of any life beyond the two of them. The rest of the house had fallen into disrepair, dust thick on the furniture, wallpaper peeling like dead skin, but her room was spotless, as though it existed in a separate world from the decay outside, and in that world only two people mattered. When the end came, it was quiet. Her breathing slowed, her grip on his hand loosened, and for a moment the house was utterly still. He leaned down, pressed his lips to her forehead, and whispered her name. No sobs, no calls for help, only silence. The doctor expected him to collapse, to break under the weight of her absence, but he didn't. He simply sat there, holding her hand long after her skin had gone cold. When the doctor finally asked if he wanted her body prepared, he shook his head. "She's not gone," he said. "She's here. She'll always be here." For the next 2 days, no one saw him. Fade. Townsfolk began to murmur again, stories of the brother who couldn't let go, who might not even have buried her yet. And though no one could prove it, there were those who swore they saw a candle burning in her upstairs window every night that week. The last person to enter that house while they were both alive was a churchwoman named Mrs. Harrow, sent with bread and condolences one bitter February morning. She would later tell her daughter she felt the air change the moment she stepped inside, thick, almost metallic, like the scent of rust. The curtains were drawn so tight that the daylight barely touched the floor. She saw them sitting in the parlor, close together on the old settee, their knees nearly touching, speaking in voices too low to catch. When they noticed her, the woman smiled faintly, but her eyes did not leave her brother's face. Mrs. Harrow offered the bread, asked about their health, made small talk the way people do when they are trying to measure the temperature of a room. The brother spoke for them both. He said they were fine, that they had everything they needed, that the house was warmer than it looked. His voice was steady, polite. but Mrs. Harrow noticed his hand resting on hers the entire time, thumb brushing against her skin in a way that made her throat dry. After she left, Mrs. Harrow lingered by the gate, looking back at the dark windows. She said she could hear laughter from inside, quiet, intimate laughter, the kind people share when no one else is supposed to hear. She told her daughter later that it wasn't the sound of joy she heard, it was something else, something that made her feel she had stepped into a story that had been going on long before she arrived and would continue long after she was gone. By the following year, they had stopped appearing in town altogether. People whispered that they had enough food stores to last a lifetime, and that maybe that was the plan, to live out their days without ever letting the outside world in. No one was invited to the house. No one was allowed past the gate. In time, the younger generation didn't even know their names. And yet even so often, an old-timer would pause when passing the hill, gaze at the blackened windows, and mutter the same thing: "She'll never leave him." The words carried a weight heavier than gossip, as if they weren't describing a choice, but a truth as old as the blood running through their veins. They say the roots of a family tree run deep, but in this family, those roots twisted inward, curling around themselves until nothing new could grow. The old records in the courthouse tell a quiet story, if you know how to read them. Birth dates too close together, names repeating every other generation, cousins with the same last name marrying under the same roof. On paper, it looked like tradition. In reality, it was a closed circle, one that never let strangers in. Her grandfather had married his own cousin. Her great-aunt's children were also her second cousins. By the time she and her brother were born, the bloodline was less a river and more a stagnant pool. It was an arrangement no one spoke about, because no one outside the family was ever supposed to see the ledger. But the truth lingered in their faces, in their mannerisms, in the uncanny resemblance that made them look more like mirror images than siblings. In the beginning, the townsfolk thought it was grief that kept her close to him after their parents died. It made sense. Two young people, alone, clinging to the only family they had left. But grief fades. What they had did not. It deepened, calcified, became something the town could no longer explain with kind words. They began to notice the way her voice changed when she spoke to him. Soft, possessive, like someone speaking to a lover they could never lose. And he responded in kind. When they walked to the market, he carried her parcels and refused to let anyone else help. When she fell ill one winter, he wouldn't leave her bedside, even when neighbors offered to sit with her. There were no suitors, no courtships, no other names whispered in connection to hers. Only his. Always his. The strangest thing was, they didn't seem to hide it, not from each other, not from the world. It was as if they lived in a space where no rules applied, where judgment codes couldn't touch them. Perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps it was something far more dangerous. The belief that what they had was not only acceptable, but inevitable. The rest of the family had either died or moved away, leaving no one to intervene. And so, inside the locked gates of the house on the hill, the two of them built a life that ignored the lines everyone else had been taught to respect. They ignored them until the day she died, and maybe, in their minds, they never crossed a line at all. They buried her in the cold of January, in a plot that had been waiting for her for more than 70 years. Her gravestone bore only her name and the date she died, but the townspeople didn't need more than that. They remembered her. They remembered the way she spoke to him, her brother, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She called him darling, with a voice that was almost a whisper, almost a prayer. Some said it was sweet, others said it was sick, but no one dared to ask her why. When she was young, she lived in the house on the hill, the one with the boarded windows and the family crest carved into the front steps. The story went that the house had been built not for comfort, but for containment. Every soul born inside those walls carried the weight of something that could not be spoken aloud. And in that house, there was only one person she trusted, only one person she ever seemed to see. Her brother, the one she never left, not even when the world outside was calling. In photographs, they stand close, too close. His hand on her shoulder, her eyes fixed on him like he was the only thing keeping her alive. Neighbors would catch them walking in the orchard, their heads bent together, their voices low. They never looked like children conspiring. They looked like something older, something bound together by threads too tight to pull apart. When their parents died, the town expected her to marry, to move away, to let her brother find his own life. But she didn't. Instead, she locked the gates to the house on the hill and pulled the curtains tight. The years began to slow inside those walls, the seasons passing without witness. The two of them became a shadow, a rumor, a thing people spoke about only in kitchens late at night. By the time anyone realized the truth, it was too late. They weren't children anymore. They were something else entirely. Two lives woven so closely together that one could not be understood without the other, and for the rest of her days she called him darling. No matter who was listening,